Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Boost Efficiency by Connecting with Your Customers More Easily. Just quickly, I'd like to say sorry for the brief delay in starting. We've had some technical difficulties, so hopefully they've ironed out now. Again, I'd like to extend a thank you to the over 450 of you joining us today. Really excited to have you all with us. While we wait for those of you who are still joining the webinar, I'll just run through a couple of brief housekeeping points and introduce you to our fantastic panelists. Myself, I'm Scott Cormack, Global Event Director here at Reuters Events. And if you've tuned into our previous webinars, you probably know this speech as well as I do by now. Joining us today, we have a great panel of customer care leaders who are eager to dive into this discussion. So I'll waste no time in introducing them. First up on the panel today, we have Pete Polgraf, VP Global Service Desk at DHL. Pete is a friend of us here at Reuters Events and has featured as a speaker at our previous customer service events in the past. With over 17 years experience in DHL, boasting a resume that has elevated DHL's customer service to world-class standards, we're really excited for him to bring his wealth of expertise to the panel today, all the way from the Czech Republic. Rounding out our more intimate panel today is Scott Ballantyne from today's sponsor, Caller ID Reputation. Scott has over 30 years of global telecom and IT experience, and I think he's just popped up on the screen as well. Having held senior executive roles at T-Mobile, Vonage, Asia Global Crossing, and Motorola, as well as with Dell and HP, he truly understands the changing landscape in the ecosystem of carriers, enterprises, and consumers. And so I'm sure you'll agree he's a fantastic addition to the panel today. It's always great to have another Brit on these panels, so happy to have you join us today, Scott.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm sorry I was late. I had a little bit of computer problems, so I had to dash downstairs and get in my old PC.
No problem. As I mentioned, Caller ID Reputation are the sponsors of today's webinar, and I wanted to give a brief introduction for those who don't know of them. Caller ID Reputation are fighting the battles and providing the solutions that are helping legitimate businesses to overcome spam and scam filters and help businesses get their customers to answer their phones again and protect your brand reputation. Finally, I'd like to welcome back someone who is a mainstay on our customer service webinars, and I'm sure you're all familiar with by now, Nicholas Zeisler. Nick, I'm always happy to try and come up with new ways to introduce you, but it is getting a little bit tricky now. Great to have you return to lead the line for another customer service webinar. Nick, as you'll see behind him, he is the principal of Zeisler Consulting and a former director of CX at HP. We're excited to continue to have your expertise feature throughout our webinars. Before we kick things off, I'll just revert back to those couple of pieces of housekeeping I mentioned at the start. There are over 450 of you joining us today from a host of different countries and exciting brands, such as AT&T, IHG, Verizon, and the Houston Astros, as well as many, many more that I don't have the time to mention. But it's really exciting to have you all join all of you joining us today. As such, please do let us know in the chat function that you should see on your screens if you have any questions that you would like to pose to the panel, or even feedback or opinions that you have. We welcome all of your interaction and we'll be sure to incorporate it throughout the webinar. Finally, the webinar will be recorded. So if you'd like to watch me give this intro speech again, or if you'd like to revisit some of the discussion from today, please do keep an eye out for that in your inboxes next week. But that's enough from me. I'll hand over to you, Nick. Why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Scott, and appreciate all the flexibility and the dynamic way that we're having to piece everything together. Those of you observing aren't aware that of all the technical nature of the issues we had right before we went live, but that's kind of where things are in 2020. So Scott and Pete, thanks both for joining today, and thanks for your extra time. And in advance, thanks for the expertise that you're sharing with us today. I want to start off, this discussion today is about a seamless, personalized experience. We're talking about how we're connecting with our customers and the importance of technology and new technologies and new ways of learning about what our customers want from us and how we can best serve them and support them. We have two really interesting panelists today that both bring a different perspective, and I should say different from what we normally talk about on panels like this. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they fuse together these two different perspectives. And so let's just jump right in. I want to talk to Pete at DHL. Your organization is kind of a behind the scenes group within Deutsche Post DHL. You support the people who support your customers. This perspective is sometimes missed. And I'd like for you to just kind of tell us a little bit about the work that goes on behind the scenes. And as you put it in your organization, you put people back to work. That's the mantra you have. Why don't you share a little bit about what your organization does within DHL?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. Good to be here. And Scott, nice to hear your voice finally. So good to hear that. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So at DPDHL, we have many different organizations and we have different divisions, from our express division to our supply chain division and a few in between. And what I do is my team supports across the globe the 500,000 employees of DPDHL. So we are the ones who put our people back to work so that they can help the customers that need our assistance. So it's a little bit different perspective. It's not the express call center or things like that. It's the internal call center working on our people. And I think it's interesting for us because we have the same passion that if you're facing an internal customer or an external customer, it's a customer, right? So we have the same passion to link why what we do is important and how important it is to make sure that every time we're dealing with one of our users, we get them back to work as fast as possible so that they can help our external customers use our product and use our services. So I think that's the thing for us that we really focus on, Nick.
Yeah. Not that there's anything necessarily glamorous about customer support, but there's such a robust support mechanism behind the support that it's important to recognize, not just so that we can have that team mentality and we're all in this together, but also simply just to understand and recognize how much goes into it. Because one of the things that I think, Scott, we want to talk to you about, especially when it comes to caller ID reputation, is that when it comes to simply communicating with our customers and meeting our customers where we are and hearing their voice, sometimes it takes technology that we hadn't even really thought of in the background. So why don't you share with us a little bit about the technology of ID reputation and caller ID reputation and how they interact with customers and what they bring to the fight, so to speak, for support?
Horsey, I'd be happy to, and it's nice to see you again, my friend. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And thank you to Pete and the whole Reuters organization for bringing this great team together and allowing me and others to engage in a conversation that's one of my favorite topics, which is allowing enterprises to have really sticky conversations with their customers. So caller ID reputation has built a pretty unique revolutionary foundation tech platform that allows enterprises in real time to monitor and actually change the health of their outbound calling operations. I mean, let's be honest, as customer service experts, as telecom experts, but frankly, as human beings, we've all seen the explosion in the last few years of illegal robocalling, scam calling, spam calling, call it what you will calling, that has rendered the consumer's ability to answer the phone in somewhat way useless. That born an entire industry from carrier interactions, from app developers, and from third-party analytics company, an entire industry, quite frankly, rightly, to protect the consumer from receiving bad acting callers, right? But what's happened in the last year or so is the pendulum swung a little bit too far the other way. In the US alone, it's estimated that there are 100 billion, that's a billion with B, legitimate TCPA compliant business to consumer calls every year. It's estimated that almost 20% of those are being erroneously blocked or tagged as bad actors. So that's stopping legitimate businesses like Pete to get critical information to their consumers in real time. So what Caller ID Reputation have built is a real-time platform that monitors the health of their outbound calling operation, which means that they can see when real numbers to real customers are being blocked or tagged badly. That therefore allows, in some cases, critical conversations to still happen as opposed to being blocked at inception.
So Scott, you're in the States. Love that we've got the
It
Scots.
doesn't sound like it. I've been here for 25 years. My mother calls this my American accent. So
That's right. I love the fish out of water theme for today, because we've got a Scotsman in Salt Lake, and we've got a New Yorker in Prague. So, and here I am in the middle in the mountains of Colorado. So it's wonderful. But being here in the States, and obviously it's nothing new to you, although it gets worse every year. This time of year, it's election, and I'm getting tons and tons and tons of spam texts and spam calls and so forth. So this is kind of a different angle at that, right, Scott? Because what I would like is all those to be stiff-armed. But then what you're saying is that there are brands like Pete's, like DHL, for example, who are like, no, we need to be able to cut through that, right? And that's the value of caller ID reputation, right?
exactly. I mean, again, just think about the enormity of, and again, it doesn't really get to brands, it gets to use cases like delivery, like Pete with DHL, with Amazon, with the Home Depot, with you name Uber Eats, right? It goes to fraud calls. All of a sudden, people are not traveling, and the banks want to know if you were really using your credit card, where you were using those. Those are critical calls that businesses have to connect with consumers, right? And to my point is, the pendulum swung a little bit too far, in my opinion and experience, that basically said, if it's on the margin of being in the algorithm, not expected, they're going to cut that off. If you think about contact centers, right, they spend an enormous amount of money making their outbound operation efficient. Training, staffing, time of day, dialing capabilities. When they press that button, they've got no control. They're rolling the dice, right? So they've got no idea what actually gets presented on the consumer's handset. Is it going to say blocked? Is it going to say unknown? Is it going to say scam likely? Is it going to say suspected spam? This technology allows those contact centers in real time to see the behavior of their outbound DID calling numbers. So again, there's a balance here, right? Consumers have to be protected from bad actors, but consumers also need to be presented with good actors who need to have that conversation. And that's what caller ID reputation have not only built, but have already delivered.
Yeah, it seems like there's a natural need for it right there in the moment where we are these days, especially. I mean, Scott, you were talking and alluding to how things are different with nobody traveling these days, and that's one of the things that have changed, and one of the things that's affecting us. Go ahead. Yeah.
One of the big things, and again, we don't want to all jump on where we are in 2020 right now, but we have a reality that we have the biggest pandemic in a century. A lot of people who are inbound calling to hospitals or care centers are expecting calls back. If those are being erroneously tagged, people's health are at problem, right? You don't want to see the call from the hospital saying blocked. You don't want to see the call from the hospital saying unknown. You don't want to see the call from the hospital saying scam likely, right? You want to see a real number from an area code that you understand. And that's the balance. And that's why caller ID reputation has built this platform that's very unique in the ability to deliver that information ubiquitously and uniquely across 300 million Americans.
Excellent. Yeah. And this is a great point about bringing it into the reality where we are and recognizing the need and the importance that it plays, given the changes that we had. Pete, let's get to some of the changes that you're noticing as well, especially from a support perspective, where you are there at DHL as well. Obviously logistics organizations have become very important. Just as Scott was saying, the communication is so important. Also, the logistics and the transportation and the delivery are important these days. Everything's being delivered. I'm getting stuff delivered to my house all the time. Tell us a bit about how you're adjusting to this new world and the scaling and the volume and how things have changed for you, and how at DHL you guys are adjusting the way you support.
Yeah, sure. I think from a, you said it before, logistics is, we're very lucky, right? So for the business that we're in, or that I'm lucky to be a part of, is logistics. And the reality is everyone needs to move something, right? We need to move packages from point A to point B. And in this pandemic, we're seeing lots of volume that we would normally see towards the end of the year. We saw in, May and June. So our normal peak volumes that we would call peak during the holiday seasons, came in the first half of the year, right? So now, we're bracing for what will come in just a few short weeks. So I think we're seeing a lot of those things. We're also seeing, in our company, we went from, if I just look at my IT services organization, we went from 5,000 people working in the offices to over a weekend, moving 5,000 people working from home, because the countries, or the different countries, got hit around the same time and made the same global decision. So I think technology has played a tremendous role in making us move and do some things, quite honestly, that not every organization had thought about doing. I can tell you that it was interesting being in Europe and Asia, where working from home is not quite a normal thing, or wasn't a normal thing. But from a Friday to a Monday, it became absolutely normal, right? And it was interesting because as leaders, there's leaders who are on one side of the fence or on the other side. I want my people here, I want my, or offer remote working. But all the leaders had to decide, yeah, I guess we're just going to work from home. And jobs that you didn't think could be done that way are being done that way. So I think the pandemic has shown us a lot of things from a technology standpoint, as Scott mentioned, introducing new technologies to help organizations be able to continue to perform in the right way and help our consumers, get the messages that they need to get. It's also helped us as IT organizations to ramp up our knowledge of technology, to understand, how do you get this many people working from home over a weekend? How do you support that? How does your infrastructure be able to deal with the sheer volume of people on VPN now, as opposed to being in the offices? So I think it's really helped us tremendously, as I said about the volumes, but it's not all sunshine and roses, right? You've also had, in the logistics business, we have multiple business models, and our supply chain business model, it's public knowledge. We had some challenges in certain sectors because retail sectors started to shrink. People weren't necessarily worrying about their clothes on their back. They worried about food and things of that nature moving around. So, and now we're seeing some of them come back, but we also see other sectors that have grown tremendously. So I think it's been a balance for us, but I think for the logistics business, I think everyone is booming. Even I was talking to somebody recently here in Prague, and most people didn't use the delivery at home services for restaurants. Well, that thing grew by like 100%, excuse me, over just a few short weeks, because people now were, hunkered down in their homes and had things delivered. So all these logistics type businesses seem to grow and grow and grow.
And Pete, if I may add to that, Z, if you would let me.
No, yeah, please.
The idea of connecting those businesses to the consumers that are delivering critical goods, be that Deliveroo or Uber Eats, or let's be honest, think about pharmacies right now. You have an aging population who needs repeat prescriptions that do not want to go to the store. That has to be delivered. There's a cost on both sides if that connection over the phone is not made, right? If that delivery is out to be delivered and they can't find you, or they don't know if you're at home, costs both parties real big. That pharmacy has to restock that inventory, and that consumer doesn't get his or her vital medicine. So the idea of what Pete's involved in global logistics and what Caller ID Reputation are providing to stop those calls being erroneously tagged helps both sides of that critical marketplace. Because let's be honest, it's not just about the efficiency of the cost center, it's about brand reputation, right? If you don't get your stuff delivered as a consumer, you're going to be upset at that brand. If as a brand you don't get that stuff delivered because you can't contact the consumer, it's going to cost you money. So the simple act of heightening, enhancing the reputation of the brand's call at the consumer's mobile phone is an important deal.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I think in Scott's business and the stuff he's doing with his company is it's different across the globe, right? In Europe and Asia, at least we haven't. I've been in Europe. I was here for 7 years previously, and I'm here again for the last year. It's not so much of a deal where people are robocalling, right? You don't see that here in Europe so much. But I understand in the U.S. when I lived there the last 4 years, I always had to shut my phone off because I never knew who the hell was calling me about something. So I think it's really an important point that you're making. But I think there's a difference across the globe, and I think that's the one thing that we've seen here during this whole time from a logistics perspective. Having to deal with the various approaches by governments in each of the regions, right? And I think trying to adjust to that, trying to adjust your workforce, adjust, who can come to the office as essential personnel. Those are all things that we're dealing with. And I think, and we talked about the IT people, but the reality is in our business, other than the warehouse people, almost everybody was sent home. So even our divisions had people work from home who had never worked from home before. So, the whole technology nightmare that this pandemic gave us has really been actually a very good blessing in disguise from a technology standpoint, to allow companies to kind of upscale and redo and think about the things that Scott is mentioning. How do I make sure that I'm reaching my customer? How do I make sure of these things? So I think it's taught us some things, and I think it helped advance technology at most companies forward, very much so.
I'd say to that point, Pete, it's something that keeps recurring month after month after month, and the more I'm talking with people and the more I moderate these webinars, the theme still keeps coming out over and over again, that what a minute ago seemed, it's not a minute now, it's been many months going on, but if you think back to right when everything started to happen, what a minute ago was completely impossible today is all of a sudden not just it can be done, but it's got to be done because it's really the only way. And when I look at both of what you were talking about, Pete and Scott, what you're bringing to this and the new way of looking at things, you're capitalizing, jumping on, asserting yourselves at a time where, all right, we've got to take care of our customer. We've got to do something to benefit our customer. And the old way of doing it just simply won't work anymore. So we've got to rely on two things, two sides of the same coin. Our core principles, taking care of the customer, and how can we leverage technology, right? And it's the confluence of both of those things. Scott, I think you're getting at something here too, especially where we could look at this kind of cold-hearted and just simply transactional last mile delivery of logistics. But then on the other hand, as you're alluding to it, and you're not even alluding to it, you're saying it right out, it's about building that reputation. It's about building the relationship, right, between your brand and your customers by growing that trust. Right, Scott?
Yeah, it's completely about reputation. I mean, if you're at the end of the call as a consumer and you don't get that think about the use case of you call into any business and they've got an IVR that's 20 minutes long, and you press the button that says call me back because I have a problem. I have a problem with my bill, I have a problem with my delivery, I have a problem with my pharmacy, and they call you and that call doesn't get to you. What are you going to think about that brand, right? So that's why it starts with, and I said up front, it's foundationally about reputation. There's a whole bunch of companies out there that are trying to do fancy stuff on presenting brand and context and personalization, but it's not ubiquitous. What these guys are building is ubiquitous, that at any moment of the day, the contact center can see the health of their outbound reputation. And they can diagnose and make changes to those numbers that are maybe have been previously blacklisted or blocked, so that they can legitimately, so we're not talking about bad telemarketing companies that are making calls that you haven't complied to. We're talking about legitimate businesses who need to have the conversation with you. And this technology just helps that conversation get better. And in today's environment, when people are not outside, they're not in retail stores, right? They're absolutely reliant on e-commerce and delivery vehicles that maybe they hadn't had in the past. The telephone's an important place to find where you are, when you are, how you are, and what you need. So it's again, I don't want to say that this technology was born from where we are in 2020, but it's born from where we've been in the last 3 years of a pendulum swing that, again, rightly went to consumer protection, but overly hampered legitimate businesses talking to their clients.
Yeah. And Scott, and not that it necessarily is being said, but it bears mentioning that while everything's moving to digital platforms and those channels, the phone's never going away. And especially when it comes to reaching out to your customers yourself, you're going to use a phone, whether it's text or voice call, right? Yeah.
Z, that's a point that I've been hammering for years. Yes, we live in a digital age. We live in omni-channel environments. RCS is coming. We've got text bots. I defy you, wherever you are, if your phone rings, you look at it. If you get a text, you'll ignore it because it's asynchronous. Voice is synchronous. So if your phone actually buzzes and it's got a number on it, you're gonna look. You may or may not answer, but you're gonna look. Mm-hmm. Enterprises across the world have invested hundreds of billions of dollars in the voice channel as the most intimate channel to connect with their consumers. Yep. So it's not going away.
Yep.
And as people get blocked, you're stopping that ability for that conversation.
Yep. Before we move on, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping here, because one of the things, Scott, that you alluded to earlier was pharmaceuticals and making sure that you're getting your prescriptions and so forth. A lot of those are being delivered through vehicles, just as DHL, for example, and that actually echoes something that Joseph was asking in the text box here in the question and answer box. So just as a reminder, those of you who are attending here, please feel free to ask questions from the Q&A box, but also into the chat box. And that leads me to a question that Kevin Brown has asked, and I'm going to pose it to both of y'all. It says, what recommendations and tips would you give to improve efficiency in your care provision moving into next year? And I suppose that is in the context of, how things are changed. Pete, let's start with you on that.
Yeah, I think, the reality is what we've seen is so two things. I think communication as a whole with your teams has to be uplifted, right? Because the reality is we're not seeing people in the offices. We're not getting able to touch our people. So I think we need to be able to stay in contact with them as best as possible to keep them focused on the task at hand, right? To remind them why they're here, right? What are we here to do? How are we going to help people? How are we going to make sure people get their goods and we can move this along? So for us, we found that our efficiency has gone up during this time because people are more focused working from home. We don't have people coming in late. We don't have people, all these things. But I think for us, it's about the constant conversation with them and to make sure they understand why we're here and what we're doing, kind of repeating our values so that they understand the mission that they have on a regular basis. And I think that will help with us I think it'll help not only efficiency, because people will be, happy employees are efficient and they're engaged. And the more you're engaged, the better off you do your job. So I think those are the things we're trying to push from within our own leadership team. And I think that's one of the things I think we need to continue to do as you go into next year. It sounds soft and fluffy.
Yeah, certainly not.
Yeah, but it's reality. Yeah.
No, I was just going to echo that. I think these relationships that you're building internally, and then of course, Scott, the relationships that we're building externally with your customers are so important these days, right? We've gone through such a transition where at the beginning, everything was, I just need my stuff. I'm freaking out. I don't care if you care about me. I just need my stuff, right? When there's no toilet paper, I just need my stuff. And then as things grow a bit, it's more, okay, everybody's freaking out, and at least now we're freaking out together. So now it's about building those relationships out, right? So Scott, in that sense, what you're providing and what Caller ID Reputation is providing is at least another bit in that puzzle, right?
Yeah, and again, let's be. I don't want to be overly altruistic here, right? I mean, obviously, there's a need for communication to happen, but the Caller ID Reputation business is business facing, right? It's those enterprises who are, again, calling legitimately under TCPA compliance their clients, and they're wasting 20% of their efficiency, right? The ability in real time to see. So if you're a call center, you've got 10,000 numbers and you're calling those 10,000 numbers 100 times a day, right? If 20% of those are not going through at fully loaded costs, that's costing you millions of dollars in inefficiency a week. So the ability to see why those are not getting through and changing your behavior, either you rotate numbers back in and or you dial back the cadence of the use of those numbers, is saving them money. So again, there's two sides to this, right? There's consumer engagement, but there's business efficiency.
Yeah.
And Caller ID Reputation was really built for business efficiency, which on a second hand delivers consumer goodness, right? Decrease cost, increase brand awareness, decrease friction. So, but the service is very much business facing, again, for people like Pete and people who are trying to find you, trying to make sure you're at home, trying to make sure if there's a massive fraud outbreak, that dormant number, or a fire, a wildfire, there's a dormant number that all of a sudden spikes in its use. And because of these, consumer facing, apps, third parties, overly compensating for the ability for that number to be trusted, turn it off, that hurts both parties.
Yeah, you actually, that kind of preempts the question I had for you that I was going to ask, Scott, and that is that in your business, how it is that your customers and your B2B and then their to C, right? That's the whole point of how that works. Yeah. How your customers are measuring success, leveraging your technology. It sounds like it's an efficiency thing because of all the money they spend trying to reach out, right? And those are wasted dollars if they can't get through.
Exactly. Back to my point. I mean, there's so much dollars invested in the efficiency of the outbound engine, and then they press the button and they don't know the outcome.
Yep.
Right. So the major, KPIs for our customers are, first and foremost, answer rates. Right. If the answer rate goes up, the contact rate goes up. If the contact rate goes up, it goes to conversion, whatever that conversion is. If it's NPS, if it's dollars increased in ROI and marketing spend. But that's the way it works, right? So every outbound call center is spending money to try and get the consumer at the end of the phone.
Yeah.
The more they increase that contact rate, the more they increase whatever their second, third, or fourth KPI is going to be.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is, in the last year or so, is by using the Caller ID Reputation service, they're witnessing 20% of their outbound calls that are just being erroneously tagged. And then by providing insights and diagnosis as to where, the technology is deep. It's not just the numbers. It's the numbers, it's the carrier, it's the OS, and it's even at the geographic level. So they can then pull levers to manage the numbers that they're using, owned, or renting, to make sure that they're not overly being disqualified through the network to the consumer.
Sure.
Which means ultimately more contact.
Yeah. Nick, you're going to hop in. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think, I understand what Scott is saying, and it's from my vantage point, being an internal provider, if you will, we're seeing that we're using technology internally. So we're using chatbots to be able to ping people through Skype for Business, or, set up things because he's right. There's multiple channels internally that we get to use. right? So for us, it's not just the external call to the customer, it's the internal process that we have. So we're using automation to be able to drive our efficiency so that we don't have to stay on a phone waiting for someone to answer. We can ping them in several different ways to make sure that we have that communication linkage. Because I think it's important that, for us, just like everybody else, we're an internal cost, right? So we have to be as efficient as possible, and we have to drive our costs in the right direction, which is not up, it's down from my team, right? So I think that's what we're looking at. And I think, in what Scott's saying about, his product is that's very external facing in some cases, because the phone is so used in the external piece there, where it's a little different internally, the way we're using and we're interacting with our business colleagues.
Yeah. Scott, to your point, you had mentioned earlier about carriers, and that addresses or brings up one of the questions that came through in the chat box here as well. How are incoming calls looking different, and how does the technology provide for that based on the different carriers?
Great question. So the legacy of the consumer-facing protection, which you all know I was a part of for a number of years, is fragmented. So different analytics companies and different apps have singular relationships with carriers, right? Which means, therefore, there's no ubiquitous view as to what's a good call and what's a bad call. The caller ID reputation platform is built with hundreds of thousands of endpoints and the biggest device mobile platform in the country, which means any outbound call can be seen across the entire US spectrum at device level, carrier level, geographic level, and OS level, i.e. between Android and iPhone. So they can actually prescribe where the calls are erroneously being tagged over those 5 different spectrums, which therefore gives the enterprise and or their call center the ability to say, okay, I don't really care about, geographic A, device B, carrier C, but it gives them that ability to flex, which is really important. So in other words, it's not just an aggregated score of 18% of your calls are bad. 18% of your calls are being called bad, but here's the breakdown between carrier, DMA, OS, and device, which is incredibly useful for the contact center. Because again, what a contact center wants to do is maximize the efficiency of their outbound calling operation. Point, period, full stop.
Yeah, without a doubt. Okay, so shifting gears just a little bit to some of the questions that are coming in the Q&A box here and in the chat. Pete, asking about how you are addressing, especially being in that behind the scenes internal role, how you're boosting engagement with everybody being remote now, and how virtually that's working within DHL to the degree that you can share about what your group is doing and how it's working for you.
Yeah, I mean collectively across DPDHL, we're trying to reach out in various ways, right? There's a lot of virtual things happening, virtual meetings, virtual talk shows, things of that nature to try to bring the messages to people. Zoom is one of the things that everyone's using now, right? It wasn't something from a business perspective that everyone had to use. But now, even in DPDHL, we weren't necessarily a user of this, and now we are, because it helps deliver us in different ways to our employees. I think so. So for us, it's more about we're trying to stay in constant conversation with people. I use the word conversation instead of just contact, because we want people to know that we haven't forgot them. If you're sitting in Costa Rica and you used to work in a beautiful office and now you're home, which may be beautiful, but you're disconnected from the day-to-day interaction with people. So we're trying to find various ways to do that. We're sending things to people's homes, to surprise them in various ways, just to give them different things to remember us, so to speak. I think it's something that we're trying to do. It's really about having that regular conversation with people and not and not in the normal one-on-ones, right? We're doing a lot more skip levels. We're doing a lot more, random calls to people just to see if they're okay and things of that nature. So I think, and companies are doing this across the globe, right? So it's not just DPDHL. Everyone's kind of trying to invent new ways to stay connected. And I think that's something that we are trying to do as well. So.
Yeah, truly, and definitely a trick. Scott, do you have thoughts on that as well? I got another question for you if you don't, though.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. There's lots of good questions coming in, technologically speaking, about caller ID reputation, and one of them is how it works internationally. Pete had mentioned, in Prague, it's not so much that you have a lot of those spam calls coming in, but then what if these calls are coming across international lines and so forth, and from within even those countries? How does that work?
Yeah, no, so Pete's insights are right. I mean, look, the epidemic of, illegal robocalling was a relatively US specific problem. It's now growing. If you look at the BRIC countries, it's now getting into Europe significantly. The caller ID reputation solution right now is US based, but can easily turn international as and when the problem becomes larger.
Okay, great. I have another question for you here. You'd been speaking earlier, and when we talked most recently, you were talking about how folks sometimes aren't aware of what they're not aware of, kind of like the unknown unknowns. So have you got, what are some use cases that you've seen where this technology has been able to help, connect your clients with their customers?
Yeah, I mean, that's back to my thesis on, the call center efficiency, that they build everything up and then they press the button and they don't know what happens.
Yeah.
And people have asked me for years, is this specific to verticals? Is it specific to call volumes? No, really not. It can get to verticals. People would run across, high volume is the place to go. But high volume can be low value. Low volume can be massively high value. Think about, the banks questioning the efficacy of your credit card spending. And they're trying to call you to say, hey Z, were you in California last week? They've got if they don't get you on the phone under TCPA, they have to email you, right? Then they have a very hard question to answer. Did they cut your card off and piss you off because you were in California? Or do they let your card run and then it cost them 20 grand because you were in Colorado? So use cases like fraud, like delivery, as we've discussed with Pete, and other such, especially in today's world of e-commerce just spiking. Callback is huge because people are sitting at home complaining or asking questions, and IVRs are full. And if that IVR calls you back and it's erroneously stamped, you're pissed, and the client can't solve your problem. Proactive customer service is the other one. People are calling you to make sure that you're happy with the service you delivered. And then I'd say the last one was critical communications, especially in this pandemic, right? We have wildfires. We have hospitals calling loved ones to update them on where their patients are. If that call doesn't get through, bad things can happen. So, I could throw a whole bunch of brands into those 5 use cases, but I'd rather keep it at the use case level because I think that's the importance of the service that caller ID reputation has built.
Yeah, you bet. And Scott, this kind of reminds me of something that you were saying earlier. We were discussing the channels and so forth. In that instance where I'm pissed off because my credit card's being used in California, because who goes to California anymore, right? Right. But the thing is, time is of the essence there, right? And when you shift to a channel that's asynchronous like email, I needed to get that call, right? When it came through so that I could take care of it in that moment. But when it has to shift to those other channels, it becomes not just less efficient, but I'm missing that moment where I need my issue taken care of immediately.
That's the thing, because it's real time, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that caller ID reputation have built. that their clients have a real-time dashboard about the health of the outbound calling numbers, right? Yep. Again, so they can see if they're, again, 10,000 numbers, 100 calls a day, every hour they can see what's getting stamped and what's not getting stamped as it should not be. And then they can fix it to make the communication with their clients more efficient. It's an efficiency play. Yep. But it's also a branded play, and it's also somewhat of an altruistic play.
Yeah, and you can certainly use that as you're up there on your soapbox, Scott, about how phone isn't going away, right?
No, look, I've been in, for the last number of years, I've been in shows that people from the Bay Area have told me voice is dead. Go talk to the banks. Go talk to the folks that run, Uber and Lyft. And ask them if voice has gone away. Yeah, it's not. I mean, I lived in New York for 4 years, and I can't remember how many Ubers I missed because they couldn't find me in the street. Right?
Yeah, and that call would have been important back then, right?
Because I didn't know the number, or it was tagged as blocked.
Yeah,
that's real time.
Nick, it's interesting because you talk about efficiency, and I think whether you're an internal provider like we are, or you're an external provider like some of my colleagues across DPTHL or that are listening today, we all have efficiency targets from a cost perspective, right? So the phone is, we want it to go away because it's the most costly thing to handle, because you have one person, one phone call, right? And if you can drive some of your consumers to different mediums, it certainly makes your job easier. But the challenge that Scott's talking about doesn't go away, right? That, especially in the US, as I said earlier, but I think it's, we all have the same challenge, whether it's internal or external, on how do you become, the most efficient you can be, and how do you drive your customers to the channels that you want them to use, right? We're noticing internal. There was a question earlier about, are we still seeing phone usage, increase? Unfortunately, we're seeing it level. We're not seeing it drop tremendously, but we are seeing, we're introducing new channels, but people are generational. Right? They want to use what they're used to. So if you're used to using phone, you're going to use phone. Millennials want to use, text, and they want to use different pieces. So it all depends who your consumer base is, what they want. And I think that's why a lot of organizations are offering, all the channels. You come to us if you want to call us on Facebook, if you want to contact us on Facebook, contact us, wherever the user wants to be is where they want us to be, right? So. And internally, I'm not so restricted by that because we're not using Facebook internally. We're using, the normal, the chat, the automation, the phone, things of that nature.
I completely agree. I mean, look, we live in a world that I don't really like the term, but omni-channel is real, right? And consumers are choosing, but at least in my experience, the difference between business to consumer versus consumer to business, right? As our population changes in age and in culture, most of us as consumers want to deal with the businesses in an asynchronous inbound chat, inbound Facebook, inbound text chat box. However, large industries that need to get a hold of us haven't made that leap yet. So they're still using the phone as their number one channel. And that's what, caller ID reputation have built to make more efficient. But over time, obviously, RCS is coming. We all know it at some point.
It's interesting, isn't it, guys, that when we talk about channels, we get so hung up in channels, and sometimes we lose track of what the actual experience is, right? I wrote a piece recently on some experiences I had using Twitter to get a hold of some brands because I needed help, and the experience sucked. And it didn't suck because they're not leveraging Twitter properly. It sucked because their support sucked, right? And we can try to, to some people, omni-channel means putting something out there to funnel everybody to the channel that we internally want them to use. And sometimes omni-channel means spreading a not so great experience across whatever channel our customers want to come. But are we not reflecting on what that actual experience is and the support that we're delivering? We're using channel as an excuse to not address the actual experience.
Yeah, and it's just, listen, the whole argument between omnichannel is it's noisy, right? It's really, really, really noisy.
You mean noisy in that it's a distraction?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
People are distracted because they've got 300 Twitter channels at the same time. Whereas if American Express want to call you and say, Z, were you in California last week? They're going to call you, right? And again, back to my point is, it's the most efficient thing that this $1,000 computer in your pocket does to you. It rings and you look at it.
Yeah.
You don't have to go search something. You don't have to log into something. You don't have to, change your behavior to do something that's unnatural. If that thing rings, you're going to look at it.
Yeah.
And that's why, at least in this decade, business to consumer communication is still vitally delivered through the mobile phone.
Yeah. Hey, Pete, you were gonna jump in there too. What have you got?
It's interesting because I think, it used to be where, a customer service employee was focused on the customer experience, right? That CX piece. How am I interacting with you? How do I make you feel? Are you happy with me? And now they're starting to deal with, there's a convergence of the CX and the UX. So a customer service person is now having to be, answering for the technology that may not be working, the chat that people didn't like to use, right? All the different things that they maybe didn't have to deal with before, and they just had to worry about being nice and getting you hooked in, right? But now it's about answering, all the sins of the world, right? So it's that CX UX conversion that is now happening, for our agents, right? And we're a less call center. We have in DPDHL, there's, within our business units, there are people that answer the "where's my package" phone calls, right? But with our team, it's my email's not working. This application that worked fine 2 minutes ago doesn't work anymore. So it's all these different things that we're dealing from a technology perspective. So it's really interesting for us to really help our people understand that convergence of the CX and the UX in our environment.
What an interesting perspective, Pete. That's brilliant, because normally, in the CX world, I'm talking about CX and UX as if they're interchangeable, or perhaps even that they're part of the same. I mean, they are. They're part of the same universe, but at the same time, one's actually affecting the other, right? Mm-hmm. And as you add new channels, you're adding new opportunities to fail.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when we're developing new UX pieces, we're really looking at how is the CX, what's the user feeling? How are they integrating with it? Is it, is it something well received? Is it clunky and delivering them a bad experience? So those are, and I think whether you're internal or external, it's the same challenge that you have, right? You're a customer service organization, so your job is to make that user, I don't want to say happy, but to resolve their issue, put them back to work, right? And I think that's something that is that we all have in common, regardless whether you're internal or external.
And just to add to that, Pete, you can only make them happy if you can connect with them.
Right.
Yeah. So if you're not being able to connect with them, you're not going to make them happy, which makes the issue double down badly and can adversely affect your brand reputation.
Sure.
Awesome. Great.
This thing is circular.
Yeah. Great way to bring it back. That's awesome. We're running up towards the top of the hour now. Before we break though, and before we take off, one of the things that I'm enjoying with these conversations that I'm having recently is, as we look back and reflect on everything that's been weird over the last 9 months now, basically, so much that's changed. I like to finish these discussions that I'm having, both professionally and personally, with your reflection, your thoughts on this question. And we'll hit both of you up before we shut down here. What do you think that's going to be enduring, that's changed now as a result of everything, that you look at as a positive thing? You look into 2021. 2020 happened, right? For better, for worse, mostly for worse, I guess a lot of people are saying. What do you think we're taking forward into the future that is going to be something that we'll look back and say, you know what, as bad as it was, we have this now, we have this thing going on now, and that turned out all right? Pete, let's start with you.
Sure. I think, and I alluded to it earlier, I think that two things. I think more than two things, sorry. I think as individuals, we are listening to each other. Had the t-shirt. We are listening to each other. We are, you know, kind of understanding that life happens around us. You know, I was expecting on this call at some point that my 3-year-old's going to run through the door and scream something, right? Because it's now acceptable. If you thought a year ago, if someone ran into a conference call, most people on the call would be like, oh, for crap's sake, you know, can't you, you're working, can't you keep your kids private, or, you know, things of those nature. Now it's kind of like, you know, life happens around us. We're all in the same situation. Here in the Czech Republic, they closed the schools. So all the kids are doing work from home, you know, like a lot of places across the globe. And it's hard. And I think that, you know, while I think empathy is something that is still lacking across mankind, I think it's something that has definitely will continue to grow, because we now realize that we're all in the same shit together. Sorry to say it like that. But I think,
yes.
and that's something that people, you know, there's more understanding, there's more empathy for individuals, and I think that's going to be lasting.
Yeah, that's great. And it's awesome, because I'm actually looking for investors in my new company that rents 3-year-olds to people like me who don't have kids, so that they can have the actual, you know, Zoom experience. Thanks, Pete. Scott, what do you see?
That's a tough one for me, to be honest. I think I'll echo Pete. I think we've got better at personal communications, because sitting in boardrooms, doing email, taking text, you're not looking at the other person. So I think, you know, albeit over Zoom or Slack or whatever, I think we're having more quote unquote FaceTime. That's not a plug. I think that's healthy. I think we're listening a little more. Sports being back is good. The Borat movie is going to be funny. Being allowed to wear sweatpants in the office is just awesome.
That's great. That's you can go on all day with a list like that.
Oh
awesome.
My goodness, yeah, all day comfort. But I do, no, seriously, I do believe that it's, in a remote sense, brought people back to real conversation, as opposed to old-fashioned office bullshit conversation. You know, just the fact that we can do this, we can see each other's face, we can hear each other's voice. We're not, you know, triangulating technologies of what we're doing, is a little real. And I don't know if it's the new normal or the now normal, but it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
You know, you can just get rid of people dying, it would be nice. But
I hear a common thread in both of your comments there. So that's great. We are up at the top of the hour. Thanks to both of you. Pete Polgraff from Deutsche Post DHL. Thanks so much for joining us. Scott Ballantyne, representing our host, Caller ID Reputation. Scott, thanks to the folks at Reuters for hosting us, and thanks certainly to everybody who joined us. Thanks for your great questions as well.
Yeah. And Z, thanks to you. You did a nice job, buddy. Thank you.
Thanks, Z. It's great to see you.
Appreciate it, fellas. Scott, back to you.
Yeah, we're getting good at timing those appearances on screen as you type in there. But yeah, as he said, that wraps up today's webinar. I know a lot of ground was covered and a lot of topics were covered there. So I hope everyone found it as informative as I did, and I'm sure the other panelists as well. I'd like to take a moment to thank our fantastic duo of panelists, Scott and Pete, for lending us their time and their expertise today, and also to Nicholas Zeisler for guiding us through today's discussion. Finally, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Caller ID Reputation, for working with us to create this hugely successful webinar. If you'd like to check out what they have to offer and how it can benefit your business, please head over to www.calleridreputation.com, or look out for more details that will be attached alongside the recording of today's webinar that you will all receive early next week. Up next from us at Reuters Events, the webinars don't stop coming, and also Z won't stop as well. He'll be there as well. On October the 28th, we are hosting our next webinar, Voice of the Customer, creating a seamless, personalized experience that boosts loyalty and drives revenue. I'd love to see you all there if you can make it. And last but not least, I'd like to thank each and every one of you who's joined us today live, or will be listening live, or will be listening on demand, sorry. I hope you enjoy the discussion and gain some actionable takeaways. Thank you from all of us at Reuters Events, and we hope to see you next week.
Thanks, Scott.
Good. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Enjoy your day. Ciao.